Hi. My 25th reunion at Smith College was the saddest thing I had ever gone to. My nephew was graduating from Trinity College, and the whole family was in Hartford, Connecticut for the ceremony. I drove to Northampton, Massachusetts, where Smith is, for my reunion. The dinner the night before was nice, though a few of my friends had been through a lot and were feeling pretty down. But really what got to me was the panel the next day. Several people were asked to speak, and then there was an open mic. It seemed to be a litany of sorrows and tragedies: broken marriages, special needs children, breast cancer, failed careers, death of loved ones. There were many tears. And about halfway through, I just left. I got in my car and I drove back to Hartford to join my husband, Ben, who was 20 years my senior, and my learning disabled son, Quinn. My mother, it turns out, had just had the first of many strokes, which would leave her partially paralyzed and cognitively impaired, and had been taken to the emergency room. At 46, life was upon me. In contrast, my 10th had been a blast. We were so full of energy, excitement, and optimism, some newly married, starting families, traveling, beginning promising careers, looking forward to wonderful lives. I was a relatively new reporter at the Washington Post then, and I wrote quite a funny piece about my reunion. I had intended to write about my 25th, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What would I say? Life is hard. I missed my 50th last year. Well, actually, it's 2 years ago, where I was supposed to do a panel on spirituality in our 70s. My husband, who died in October after suffering from dementia, had taken a turn for the worse, and I couldn't go. One of my good friends at the reunion got word that her husband, who had cancer, was failing. She jumped on a plane and barely made it to his bedside before he died. I had never planned to write about my 50th. Again, what would I have said? The Buddhists have a word, dukkha, which means suffering, but it means more than that. It means life. Life is suffering. We all suffer. Some obviously suffer more than others, but the truth is that nobody gets a pass. So the question is, how do we lead happy, productive lives given that we're all in it for it at some time or another? You might ask yourself, why bother? What's the point? Well, I don't know about you, but if I see or have to read one more book on how to be happy, I'm going to scream. I nearly threw one book across the room this past week, and here's what got to me: the formulaic, bromidic, superficial, fatuous advice which the person writing the book, and if you have to know the real story, doesn't follow at all. You want to know how to be happy? It's very simple. All you have to do is you eat well, you exercise, you get plenty of sleep, and you meditate. That's it. Well, what they don't say, because it sounds elitist, is that you should have lots of massages, manicures, hairdressers, great clothes, and plenty of staff. A car and driver, a private plane, and a yacht don't hurt, especially when you need to get away from it all. And turn off those annoying cell phones and computers, especially when you're at fancy dinners and restaurants, and when you're having great sex. This kind of advice is great for the 1% of the 1%, and even then, when the crunch comes, it doesn't really work. People get sad and they get depressed when bad things happen. That's normal, it's human. And often these books make you feel as though there's something wrong with you because you're not handling your pain or your grief properly. I don't mean to sound cynical, but I would venture to say that most of the people in this room have tried all of these things when their lives have taken a terrible turn. They may assuage the pain somewhat, but suffering is suffering. You can't get away from it. And when I think of the families and children in Syria and the Sudan and Central Africa, the families of those in the church in Charleston, those who were beheaded by ISIS, the families who have lost their spouses and children in floods and tornadoes, or even those who just exist below the poverty line every day, the idea of telling them that they could be happier if only they followed those rules, would be really embarrassing. Most of these books don't really mention prayer. Meditation is about as far as they'll go. You don't want to turn off too many upscale, intellectual, secular readers. Yet when you see these horrific stories on TV or read about them in the papers, inevitably the relatives of victims will talk about the healing power of prayer. Countless studies have shown that believers, especially as they age, are happier, live longer, and heal faster than those who are not. Well, that's great for those who can believe. But what about those who simply can't believe? What should they do? This is where gratitude comes in, but I'm going to get to that in a moment. I happen to be someone who was an atheist most of my life. My father was in the army in Germany in World War II, and he liberated Dachau, the concentration camp. He had his staff photographers take pictures of the victims, both alive and dead. He had scrapbooks made of them, and so at age 4, at the end of the war, I saw those scrapbooks. I had believed in God until then, but it was impossible afterwards. How could the God I prayed to allow such terrible things to happen? Those people must have been praying too, and it didn't work. Nevertheless, I've always been fascinated by religion, partly because so many really smart people over the ages have believed. It's been almost 9 years now since Donald Graham, then the publisher of the Washington Post, asked me to do a religion website after I complained that the paper was not covering what I thought was a really big story. After all, religion informs the lives of 95% of the people on the planet. How could we not write about it? Well, founding and running On Faith has been the most exciting, interesting, fulfilling thing I've ever done, and it has led me to discover so much about so many religions and so many beliefs. To me, there is no more fascinating conversation or important conversation in the world than what is the meaning of our lives. I've given it a huge amount of thought, certainly in the years since I've been doing the website, and I'm sure most of you have read Viktor Frankl's incredible book, Man's Search for Meaning, which he wrote after he had left the Nazi concentration camps. In it, he concludes, quote, "If there is a meaning in life at all, then there must be a meaning in suffering. Suffering is an ineradicable part of life, even as fate and death. Without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete." I've interviewed many people over the years about what gives their lives meaning. Some will say it's their work, some their faith, some will say their families. Some are deeply religious, some are spiritual, and some are atheist. But there is hardly anyone who has not pondered the thought. This is probably, at my age, and in my situation, the most important time to contemplate meaning. Where in college, you can stay up all night debating the subject. When you're middle age, you're too busy scratching and clawing your way to the top and raising your children to really think about it. But now the crunch has come. Now I really need to figure out what this has all been about and try to deal with it head on. My husband, Ben, was part of the grant study at Harvard, starting in 1938, where they studied nearly 300, quote, normal, unquote, male students, including Jack Kennedy. Every year, they filled out forms about their lives. George Valiant, who led the study for many years, came to this conclusion about what gave meaning to their lives, what made them happy. Happiness, he said, is full of love, full stop. So what makes my life and what gives my life meaning? What makes me happy? Well, there's no simple formula, and I can only speak for myself. All I can say is that being grateful for what I have has gotten me through a lot of anguish. As I look at my life, I will be 74 next week. It has been full of happiness and full of sorrow, but has always been full of love. I am so grateful to have had loving parents and a wonderful brother and sister. I've had a fabulous husband, and I have a magical son. I have great friends, but love is not a one-way street. You have to be as loving as you wish to be loved. I cherish those I love dearly. That's an important word to me. A sense of community is essential. My family is the most important thing in my life. I am grateful for them. My work at On Faith is my passion. I can't imagine not doing something I care deeply about, and I never intend to stop. I am grateful for that. Taking care of my husband, Ben, and my son, Quinn, and my mother has given me more spiritual satisfaction than I had ever hoped to have, no matter how difficult it has been and continues to be. I have nothing but gratitude for that. I love giving parties. To me, it's about generosity of spirit. Nothing gives me more pleasure than getting friends together, people I care about, around a table with wine and candles, good food, and good conversation. Nothing makes me happier than looking around the room and seeing people have a good time. I am so grateful to be able to do that. I meditate a lot. I have a labyrinth in the country where I walk and meditate sometimes for hours. Being near the ocean or the water gives me an enormous sense of calm and puts things in perspective for me. Being in a transcendent or sacred space fills me with a sense of peace and gratitude. I've been through a really rough patch lately. There have been days when I just didn't see how I would make it through, where I didn't want to get out of bed, where I just didn't want to go on. And what kept me going, the only thing actually, was thinking of ways I could bring joy to somebody I loved or cared about, and being grateful for what I have. I don't mean to make light of the advice you get from the happiness books. Sleeping and eating well, meditation and exercise are important. I work out every day, but that will not take away real pain and suffering. I think attitude is hugely important. I had a dancing teacher at college who shuffled into the studio one day, her shoulders slumped over, a grimace on her face. She was sort of like this, and she looked totally defeated. And she said, "What message are you getting?" she asked us. "The message is, I'm a loser, right?" Then she went back out of the room and returned, a bounce to her step, a shoulders erect, smile on her face. "I'm confident, I'm happy, a winner." Your demeanor, your posture, tell the story of what you think about yourself. It sounds so simple, but when I'm feeling really bad, I straighten up and smile into the mirror, and I especially do that when I'm out. If I send a positive message to others and they will respond positively to me, I will feel better about myself. And pretending works too. If I pretend I'm happy and grateful, I feel better. I had knee surgery last year. I found when asked how I was doing, if I replied that I was in constant pain, I felt worse. If I said I was doing fine, I actually did better. Sometimes I absolutely force myself to go out when all I feel like doing is crawling under the covers. But getting out and meeting people is distracting. It takes you out of yourself, and if you try to find out about somebody else's life, you realize that you are not the only one with problems. I no longer call myself an atheist. Years of studying many religions has made me respectful of the beliefs of others and envious of those who find solace in their belief. I call myself a somethingist after a movement in Holland. I believe something is there, and I have had enough moments of transcendence in my life to know that I am not alone, and I am eternally grateful for that. I will leave you with this thought. I have a framed copy on my desk of my favorite quote and one that I live my life by. It is by Rabbi Hillel. Quote, "I walk, I fall down, I get up. Meanwhile, I keep on dancing." Thank you very much.